Hey, my name is Wyatt Boone. I'm 30 years old, and I drive feed and supply deliveries out of Hollis Creek, Kentucky, for a co-op that serves small farms across 4 counties too small for the big distributors to bother with. Most nights, I'm the last headlights on these roads before the dark takes over completely. That turned out to matter more than I ever expected. On a Tuesday in early March, when the rain wouldn't quit, Hollis Creek is small enough that everybody already knows what everybody else needs before they call it in, which suits a man who never had much taste for talking just to fill silence. I've lived alone in the house my grandfather built since he passed 6 years ago, and most nights that was exactly as much company as I wanted. The rain had been coming down since noon, the kind that doesn't build to anything, just settles in and stays. And I was 40 minutes past the last farm on my route when my headlights caught something on the shoulder of Route 9 that didn't belong there. A woman, walking. No car pulled off anywhere near her. No gas station for 11 miles in either direction. And she had something wrapped against her chest under a jacket that was doing nothing against the weather. The wipers were losing the fight against the rain. And for a second I actually slowed down, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks the way they sometimes do on these long roads at night. They weren't. I slowed down before I'd even decided to. She flinched hard when my headlights swept over her, the kind of flinch that comes from a body expecting to be hit, not just startled. And that flinch told me more in half a second than most people tell me in a year. I pulled onto the shoulder well ahead of her, left my hazards on, and got out into the rain instead of just rolling the window down, because I didn't want her looking up at a stranger from inside a truck cab like she was trapped in it. "Ma'am, you need a ride somewhere?" She stopped walking, didn't come closer. The bundle against her chest shifted, and I heard the small, thin sound of a baby not quite crying yet, just working up to it. Her eyes went from my face to my truck, to the co-op logo on the door like she was reading a form she didn't trust. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. "I'm just going to stand right here until you tell me what you need." Her voice came out rough, like she hadn't used it in a while, or like she'd been crying earlier and it had worn something raw in her throat. "I don't need anything from you. You're on a county road at 11 at night in the rain with a baby," I said. "That's not nothing." She looked down at the bundle, adjusted whatever she was holding without looking away from me, and for a second I thought she might just start walking again, and I'd have to decide whether to follow at a crawl in my truck, like that wasn't its own kind of frightening. Then something in her shoulders gave out. Not dramatically, just a small collapse, like she'd been holding a weight up by pure will, and the will had finally run thin. "I don't know where I'm going," she said. "I just need somewhere to go." I didn't ask the obvious questions right then. Not where she'd come from, not who she was running from, not why a woman with an infant was walking a rural highway after dark in weather that could take the both of them down with cold before anything else got the chance. I'd learned a long time ago, watching my own mother stand exactly this still in exactly this kind of silence, that the questions could wait. And the only thing that actually mattered in the first 60 seconds was making sure she understood she had a choice. "I've got a truck with a heater that works, and a house 20 minutes from here with a spare room," I told her. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm telling you what's available if you want it. And if you'd rather I just call somebody to come get you and the baby somewhere safe and public instead, I'll do that just as fast." She studied me for a long moment in the rain, water running off both of us in sheets now, the baby's small sound building toward a real cry. Her eyes were the only steady thing about her, like she'd used up every other kind of strength she had, except the kind that watches a stranger's hands and decides. "Your name," she finally said. "Wyatt. Wyatt Boone." She nodded once, like that settled something specific in her, and stepped toward the truck. I opened the passenger door for her and stood back far enough that she could see the whole cab before she committed to it, empty except for a clipboard and a thermos. She got in without another word, a small diaper bag slung over one shoulder, with Eli still held tightly against her chest, arranging him with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, even exhausted, even scared. I climbed in the driver's side, cranked the heat up, and pulled back onto the road slow enough that the tires wouldn't throw her against the door. "The baby's name is Eli," she said after a while, apropos of nothing, like she needed me to know he had a name before I asked. "He's 8 months. I didn't ask hers back. I figured she'd give it to me when she was ready, and pushing for it felt like exactly the wrong kind of question to lead with. Instead, I told her about the spare room, the fact that the lock on the door worked from the inside, that I'd sleep with my own door shut and wouldn't come near hers unless she asked me to. She was quiet long enough that I thought maybe I'd said too much, made it sound like I'd already planned for this exact scenario. Which in a strange way, I suppose some version of me had, a long time ago, watching somebody else do this same thing for my mother. "Thank you," she said finally, so quiet I almost missed it under the wipers. We didn't talk much the rest of the drive. When we pulled up at the house, I cut the engine and sat there a second before getting out, giving her room to change her mind if she wanted to. She didn't. She followed me up the porch steps with Eli's small cries finally breaking loose into the open air, and I unlocked the door and stood back to let her go in first. Inside, I got the space heater going in the spare room and dug out towels while she paced the kitchen, trying to settle Eli, murmuring to him low and constant in the particular rhythm of somebody who'd learned exactly what worked. I put water on for tea because it was the only thing in my kitchen that felt like it might actually help. And when I set a mug down near her on the counter, she flinched again, smaller this time, and said something that answered a question I hadn't asked yet. "He never hit me where it would show on shift," she said. "Dalton, my husband. He always knew exactly how hard was too hard for a bruise anybody would ask about." I kept my hands where she could see them and didn't move any closer. "What does he do? For work?" "State trooper," she said. 15 years on the force 2 counties over. Everybody in 3 towns either owes him a favor or's scared to be the reason he needs one. That single sentence told me more about the size of the problem than an hour of explanation could have. A man with a badge and 15 years of favors wasn't the kind of threat you outran by driving far enough. He was the kind of threat with access, with friends who'd run a plate without asking questions, with a version of events that would sound entirely reasonable to anybody who hadn't stood close enough to see the flinch. "Does he know you left tonight?" I asked. "He will by morning," she said. I took Eli and walked out while he was on a night shift. I didn't take the car because he tracks the mileage. I didn't take my phone because he put something on it once, some app, and I never trusted that he'd taken it off just because he said he had. I sat with that fact for a second, the specific, practiced carefulness of a woman who'd clearly planned this exact escape more than once in her head before she ever had the nerve to walk it. "Where were you headed?" I asked, "before I found you?" "Nowhere," she said again. "I just needed to be somewhere he wasn't standing." She told me her name was Faye, somewhere close to midnight, after Eli had finally gone down in a nearly new portable crib my cousin had stored in the attic, on a firm mattress with nothing loose around him. "Faye Winslow," she said. "That's my name again." I stopped using Merrick the day I decided I was actually leaving, even before I had the nerve to do it. I told her a little about myself in return, not because she asked, but because it felt wrong to keep taking without giving something back. "My mother did something like what you're doing tonight," I said. 26 years ago, with me in the back seat instead of in her arms. A trucker pulled over for us on a stretch of highway outside Bowling Green in weather about like this. Gave her a ride, gave her a week in his sister's spare room until she found her feet. I don't remember much of it firsthand. I was 4, but I remember growing up hearing that story enough times that some part of me always figured I owed somebody a debt I'd never get to pay back to the actual man. So I've been paying it forward instead, whenever the chance comes up. Faye looked at me for a long moment, like she was recalculating something. That's why you didn't hesitate, she said, out there on the road. That's why, I said. In the morning I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Faye singing something low and off-key to Eli in the kitchen, stopping herself embarrassed the second she heard my footsteps. Don't stop on my account, I told her. Nothing wrong with a bad voice if it's kind. She laughed, actually laughed, the first sound out of her that didn't have fear folded into it, and something in my chest settled at having caused it. Eli took to me faster than I expected. By the second morning, he'd stopped crying when I picked him up to let Faye shower in peace. And by the third, he'd taken to grabbing my finger every time I got close enough, gripping it with a strength that seemed unreasonable for something that small. I found myself rearranging my delivery schedule to get home earlier, telling myself it was just to help with the baby, knowing somewhere underneath that it wasn't only that. That same afternoon, I drove into the next county to pick up formula and diapers one size larger than the few Faye had brought with her, and came back with a second-hand baby monitor too, the kind with a range long enough to reach the barn if I needed to step out there for anything. Faye found it sitting on the counter and went very quiet for a second before she said, "You didn't have to do that." I told her I know. I wanted to anyway. She didn't say anything else, but she made a point of leaving the spare room door open a full foot that night, instead of a few inches, and I understood it for the small, deliberate signal it was. On the fourth day, I made the kind of mistake that comes from wanting to help too fast. Gus, who's run the co-op counter since before I was born, and who I trust about as much as I trust anybody, asked why I'd been requesting the early runs all week, and I told him, not everything, just that I had a woman and a baby staying with me, fleeing a bad situation, needing quiet. I thought I was being careful. I didn't think about the fact that Gus's nephew works dispatch for the state police 2 counties over, or that Gus mentions things at the diner counter the same easy way he mentions weather. Faye found out I'd told anyone at all when I came home the next evening, and found her standing in the kitchen with her arms wrapped around herself, Eli already asleep, her face gone the particular gray of someone who's just watched a door she thought was locked swing open a crack. "You told people," she said. "Not a question. One person. I thought I could trust him to keep it quiet." "Nobody can keep anything quiet in a town this size," she said, voice shaking now, not with tears but with something closer to fury. "Dalton has people everywhere, Wyatt. That's the whole problem. That's why I didn't go to my sister's, why I didn't go to a shelter I'd ever mentioned near him, why I walked out onto a highway with no plan instead of somewhere he might think to look first. I stood there and let her be right about it instead of defending myself, because she was right, and because the only thing worse than admitting a mistake is making someone argue you into admitting it. "I'm sorry," I said. "That was mine to own, and I didn't think it through. Tell me what you need me to do now, and I'll do exactly that, not what I think is helpful." She was quiet a long moment, arms still crossed, and then some of the fury drained into something more tired. "Just ask me first," she said, "next time. Even the small things. I've had enough people deciding things around me to last a lifetime." "I will," I told her, every time. The days after that fell into a rhythm neither of us named out loud. Faye started cooking, not because I asked, but because she said sitting idle made the fear louder. And I came home most nights to something on the stove and Eli babbling at me from his blanket on the kitchen floor, like I was the most interesting thing that had happened to him all day. I fixed the crib properly that week, drove 40 minutes to the next county over to buy one second-hand, because I didn't want Dalton or anyone helping him to trace the purchase back to my address, and spent an evening with Faye holding a flashlight while I put it together in the spare room by lamplight instead of overhead light, just in case. We didn't talk about what was between us. There wasn't room for it yet. with fear still sitting at the table with us most meals. But I noticed the way she'd started meeting my eyes a beat longer than she needed to. Small increments of trust I understood not to comment on directly. One evening that same week, I came in from a long haul, frustrated about a delivery gone wrong, more short-tempered than I meant to be, and snapped at nothing in particular loud enough that Eli startled in his blanket on the floor. Faye didn't flinch the way I half expected her to, given everything. Instead, she came and stood in front of me, steady, and said, "That's not the same as him, Wyatt. Being tired and short isn't the same as being cruel. I know the difference now better than almost anyone. I want you to know I see it too." I hadn't realized how much I needed somebody to say exactly that until she did, and I told her so, and something between us shifted a little further that night. The two of us learning each other's rough edges instead of only the emergency. Some nights after Eli went down, Faye and I sat on the back steps with 2 cups of coffee going cold between us, not saying much. She told me once, without any lead-up, that she used to imagine escape as something loud and dramatic, and instead it turned out to be this: coffee cooling on a porch step, a baby monitor crackling faintly from an open window, nothing chasing her for exactly 1 hour. Renata Cruz called on the 9th day. Faye had reached out to her through a legal aid hotline the 2nd morning, using a prepaid phone I'd bought with cash at the gas station rather than anything tied to either of our names, and Renata had been quietly building the groundwork for a protective order ever since. "We can file for a temporary order today," she told Faye over my kitchen phone, an old, unlisted landline that wasn't connected to any online account. "It won't need him served in person right away, but it will be on record, and it gives us something to stand on if he does find you before the full hearing." Faye's hand was shaking when she hung up, but her voice wasn't. Not anymore. "I want to do it," she said. "Today. I'm tired of being the only one who knows what he is." The judge signed the emergency protective order that afternoon and scheduled the full hearing for 14 days later. It would become enforceable once Dalton was served or formally notified by law enforcement, Renata explained, which meant the days right after filing were, in some ways, the most dangerous ones. Dalton found the house on the 11th day. Whether the address had reached him through Gus's nephew or through his own unauthorized searches, we couldn't yet know. But I felt the weight of my mistake all the same. I was pulling into the driveway at dusk when I saw the cruiser parked at the end of the road. Not in my driveway, just close enough to watch it. And I understood before I even got out of my truck that the waiting part of this was over. He came up the walk before I'd made it to the porch, badge clipped to his belt even off duty. The kind of man built for exactly the confidence a uniform gives someone who's used to people stepping back from it. "Wyatt Boone," he said, like he'd already looked up everything about me there was to look up. "I hear my wife's been staying here." I didn't confirm or deny it. "What can I do for you?" "You can tell her to come home," he said, voice level, reasonable. The voice of a man who'd learned exactly how much menace fit inside a calm tone. "She's not thinking straight. Postpartum depression can hit some women hard. I just want to get her the help she needs." Faye appeared in the doorway behind me before I could answer, Eli on her hip, her face gone perfectly still in a way that told me she'd rehearsed this exact moment in her head more times than she could count. "I'm not confused, Dalton," she said. "I know exactly what I'm doing." Dalton's eyes moved to her, and for just a second something colder than the calm voice showed underneath it. "Get in the car, Faye. We'll talk about this at home, not on some stranger's porch." I stepped sideways, just enough to put myself between them without making it look like I'd decided to. "She's not going anywhere she doesn't choose to go," I said. "And this isn't your jurisdiction, trooper. Or did you drive 2 counties over on your own time to remind a private citizen of that?" Something flickered across his face. calculation more than anger. A man recognizing he'd overplayed a hand in front of a witness. "This isn't over," he said, mostly to Faye. Faye didn't shrink back the way I think he expected. She stood in that doorway with Eli on her hip and said, voice carrying just enough for the whole street to hear if anyone was listening, "It's already over, Dalton. I just need you to catch up to that fact." He turned and walked back to his cruiser without hurrying, the kind of unhurried that was its own kind of threat, and drove off into the dark. Faye was shaking by the time I got the door shut behind us. "He'll come back with something better prepared next time," she said. "He always does." Word about Dalton's visit reached the Hollis Creek diner before Dalton had even been served with the emergency protective order, and by Saturday half the counter regulars had an opinion about the woman living out at my place. Marlene, who'd lived 2 farms down from mine since before I could walk, and had taken to bringing over casseroles just to get a look at the baby, cornered me by the coffee pot with her arms crossed. "Is it true what they're saying? That she ran off from a trooper? That she's unstable?" "That's what he's saying," I told her. "It's not what's true." Marlene studied me a long moment, the way people do when they're deciding whether to trust a version of events that isn't the convenient one. Then she nodded, slow. "I raised 3 daughters in this county, Wyatt. I know exactly what a scared woman looks like, and I know exactly what a man looks like when he's the reason for it. You tell her the casserole's got extra rolls in it for the baby, once he's old enough to gum on something." Not everyone in town landed as kindly. A man named Pruitt, who ran the feed scales and had known Dalton since high school, made a point of telling anyone who'd listen that Wyatt Boone had gone and taken up with a married woman who was clearly running from something worth running from, wink included, like the whole situation was a scandal instead of a woman fighting to keep her son safe. I heard about it secondhand and didn't dignify it with a response. But Faye heard about it too, from Marlene, who told her exactly so she wouldn't be blindsided by it at the grocery store. The Sunday after that, 3 of Marlene's friends from church showed up on the porch unannounced with a second-hand stroller and a bag of Eli's next size of clothes. No explanation needed beyond having heard there was a baby in town who needed things. Faye cried harder over that than she had over anything Dalton or Pruitt had done. The particular kind of crying that comes from kindness landing on a place worn raw by the opposite of it for too long. "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of my mess," Faye told me that night, voice low so it wouldn't wake Eli. "People talking." "Let them talk," I said. "I've got nothing to be ashamed of, and neither do you. The only thing that would actually shame me is if I let what people say change what I do." The county sheriff's office served Dalton with the emergency protective order the day after his first visit, a fact Renata confirmed through the sheriff's return of service filed with the court, which meant that whatever he did next would carry a weight the first visit never had. 9 days before the hearing, Dalton came back at night, and this time he didn't come alone. I was 40 minutes out on a late run when Faye called the landline number I'd given her for emergencies, voice tight and fast in a way I'd never heard from her. "He's here, Wyatt. He's got another officer with him. He's saying it's a welfare check, that somebody called in a concern about Eli." "Nobody called anything in," I said, already turning the truck around hard enough to fishtail on the wet gravel. "Don't open the door past the chain. Tell them you want it in writing. Tell them you want a supervisor's name. And stall as long as you can. I'm 12 minutes out." 12 minutes felt like an hour. When I pulled into the driveway, the second officer's cruiser was still there, lights off, and I could hear Dalton's voice raised through the closed door before I even made it up the steps. That same reasonable tone gone thin at the edges now, closer to something desperate. Faye had the door open the width of the chain, Eli screaming behind her, and Dalton's hand braced flat against the frame like he was one shoulder lean from testing whether the chain would hold. "Ma'am, the door, please. the second officer was saying, younger, clearly uncomfortable, clearly aware something about this didn't sit right even if he couldn't name it yet. You were served with the emergency protective order 2 days ago, Faye said through the gap, voice shaking but clear. You are not allowed within 1,000 feet of this house. That's not a request. That's a court order with your name on it. I came up the steps fast enough that Dalton turned, and for 1 second the mask dropped all the way, and I saw exactly what Faye had been living inside of for years. Boone, he said, this doesn't concern you. It concerns me the second you're standing on my porch in violation of a protective order, trying to talk a scared woman out from behind her own chain lock, I said. I looked at the younger officer directly. Do you have a dispatch record for this? An incident number? A supervisor's authorization? Anything logged before you knocked on this door? Or are you here because a fellow officer asked you to ride along on something personal? The younger officer's jaw tightened, and something in his face shifted as the pieces landed. Trooper Merrick said there was a concern about the child. He turned to Faye. Ma'am, are you saying he's already been served with an active order? 2 days ago, she said. Ask dispatch yourself. The younger officer stepped back from the door on his own now, something in his posture gone entirely different from a minute before. Trooper Merrick, he said, low. We need to go. Now. Dalton's hand came off the doorframe slow, the calculation happening behind his eyes exactly the way it had on my porch the first time. A man recognizing the ground had shifted under a story that wouldn't survive being written down. This isn't finished, he said, backing off the porch. And then, quieter, meant only for Faye through the gap in the door. You'll regret this. They left. Faye unlatched the chain and came apart the second the door was shut, sliding down against it with Eli clutched to her chest, and I sat down on the floor next to her without a word, because there wasn't a single thing worth saying yet that wouldn't have sounded small next to what had almost happened. Eli cried himself out slowly in her arms while I sat with my back against the door, and it was a long while before either of us moved. Like getting up first would mean admitting how close it had actually come. Renata Cruz came out to the house herself the next morning, notepad in hand, and listened to the whole account twice, once from Faye and once from me, checking that the details matched. Faye had already started documenting things on her own before she ever met me. She told Renata that morning, showing her a manila envelope she'd kept hidden in a library book for months. Photographs documenting 8 months of bruises hidden beneath sleeves and collars, time-stamped on a friend's old phone. A handful of texts Dalton had never bothered deleting because he never imagined she'd leave. Dates and details written in the back of a recipe notebook where he'd never think to look. This is good, Renata said finally, in the specific tone of a lawyer who means the opposite of what the word usually implies. Not good that it happened, good that we can use it. A trooper bringing an off-duty colleague to conduct a welfare check with no dispatch record, no incident number, and no supervisor authorization behind it is a serious problem for him, separate from anything between him and you, Faye. I'm going to petition for an expedited subpoena on his call logs and dispatch records for the last 6 months. The judge granted it within a day, and the state police's own professional standards unit produced the audit logs 4 days later, required to hand them over the same as anyone else once a court ordered it. When they came back, Renata called with the kind of controlled excitement lawyers get when a case turns. Dalton had run Faye's name and Eli's twice through the state database in the 2 weeks since she'd left, both times outside any case he was actually assigned to. Both times flagged automatically by a system meant to catch exactly that kind of misuse. The logs also showed he'd created the welfare check report after the fact and falsely listed an earlier time on it, which was its own violation on top of the first one. This isn't just going to get you your protective order, Renata told Faye. This is likely the end of his career, And it's going to matter to the judge that a scared woman's account lines up exactly with a paper trail he never thought anyone would check. Faye sat very still when she heard that, and when she finally spoke, her voice had a steadiness in it I hadn't heard before. "Good," she said. "Let it matter." The hearing came on a gray Thursday, in a courtroom 2 counties over that smelled like every courtroom seems to: old wood and paper and nerves. Dalton sat across the aisle in a suit instead of his uniform, a lawyer beside him who kept glancing at his phone like he already suspected which way this would go. Judge Priscilla Okonkwo presided, a woman with a reputation, Renata told us beforehand, for having exactly 0 patience for anyone who used a badge as an argument. Renata walked the judge through the timeline first: the flinch on the highway, the 8 months of bruises that never quite showed above a collar, the 2 unauthorized database searches, the welfare check with no dispatch record, no incident number, and no supervisor authorization behind it, its report falsified afterward to list an earlier time. The second visit, made in direct violation of an order he'd already been served 2 days before, ended only when his own colleague refused to stay. When she finished, Dalton's lawyer tried to frame it as an overprotective husband worried about his wife's mental state. Nothing more. A man who loved his family enough to check on them. Judge Okonkwo looked at him over her glasses for a long moment. "Counsel," she said, a concerned husband calls his wife. He doesn't run her name through a restricted database twice without cause, and then falsify a report to justify showing up at her door with backup. I've read a great many domestic cases in this courtroom, and I have rarely seen one this well documented against the respondent. Dalton's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Faye sat beside me with her hands folded tight in her lap, and when the judge turned to her directly, asked if she had anything to add, Faye stood, and her voice came out steadier than I'd ever heard it. "I stayed as long as I did because I believed the version of him other people saw," she said. "The trooper, the reasonable man, the one who never left a mark anybody could point to. It took me a long time to understand that a man can wear that face perfectly in public and still be exactly what I know him to be at home. I'm not asking this court to punish him for what he is. I'm asking it to make sure he can't use what he has, the badge, the favors, the 15 years, to reach either of us again." When Renata called me to confirm what I'd witnessed on my own porch, both times, I kept it plain and short. He told her to get in the car like it wasn't a request. He came back with a colleague and no dispatch record, incident number, or supervisor authorization. I've delivered feed to half the farms in this county for 6 years and never once needed backup to ask a neighbor a question. Dalton's lawyer didn't cross-examine me. There wasn't much left to argue with. Judge Okonkwo granted the extended protective order in full, ordered no contact within 1,000 feet, and referred the database misuse directly to the state police's Internal Affairs Division for its own investigation, separate from anything in family court. The order protected both Faye and Eli, and granted Faye temporary sole custody pending the divorce proceedings. As we walked out, Dalton's lawyer was already on the phone, and Dalton himself didn't look at either of us once. Dalton was suspended pending the internal investigation within a month, and by summer he'd resigned rather than face the disciplinary hearing that likely would have ended in his termination. The divorce took the better part of a year to finalize, slower than either of us wanted, but Faye never once wavered on it, not even when his lawyer tried every delay the process allowed. The divorce court awarded Faye sole legal and physical custody of Eli, and any contact Dalton sought was restricted to court-supervised visitation, which he never once used. I asked her to marry me on the porch she had crossed the first night after choosing to trust a stranger on Route 9, almost 14 months after I found her there. Once her divorce was final and there was nothing rushed or desperate left in the choice, only the plain fact of 2 people who'd built something worth keeping. She said yes before I'd finished the sentence, laughing through it the way she'd learned to laugh again somewhere in that first winter. Easy and unafraid. We married that spring in Marlene's backyard with maybe 30 people, and Eli in a little suit jacket he kept trying to take off. And when I looked for something old to carry into it, I thought of a stranger on a highway outside Bowling Green 26 years back, and figured he'd have liked knowing how the debt finally got paid. Eli calls me Dad now, has for a while, settled into it the way kids settle into the truth of a thing, long before the adults around them catch up to naming it out loud. Marlene still brings casseroles, mostly out of habit at this point, and Gus never stopped apologizing for repeating something his nephew might have passed along, though Faye forgave him for it before I ever fully did. I've thought a lot since that night on Route 9 about what actually saves a person, and I don't think it's a single rescue, one truck stopping at the right moment. I think it's 100 small choices after that, made out loud, together, until the fear finally runs out of places to hide. Last week, Eli came barreling across the kitchen floor, arms out, aimed straight at me, and Faye stood in the doorway laughing and crying at the same time the way she does now when something good catches her off guard instead of something frightening. I caught him before he could fall, lifted him up, and looked over his head at the woman who'd once told me, soaked through and shaking on the side of a rural highway, that she didn't know where she was going. She just needed somewhere to go. Turns out somewhere was right here the whole time, she said that night, once Eli was finally down. I just needed somebody willing to stop long enough to show me.